All right, we're in this series on relationships, and we've been on this journey over the past several weeks. We've talked about healthy boundaries. We've talked about dealing with difficult people, the difference a parent makes, about marriage. And this week, as our final week, 2 keys for great relationships. Now, in Jesus' day, what was the state of relationships in the Roman Empire? It was actually kind of a rough time. Morality was at a pretty low ebb in the Roman Empire. For example, many people, especially among the Romans, they were married out of social arrangements, and so it was one family arranged to another for kind of a power play to get these 2 people together. And so as a result, there wasn't a whole lot of love in those marriages. So it was common for people to have mistresses, and you can imagine that did not help build solid marriages in the Roman Empire. And what about children? In the Roman Empire, it was typical that after the child was born, that's when they would decide whether or not they wanted to keep that child. And so infanticide was a common practice. Another thing is that men held all the power. And even in the Jewish world, some rabbis had written that men could give their wives a certificate of divorce if they did something so minor as burn the toast. And so it was a tough world in relationships in that time. But here's what Jesus did. He turned the world of relationships upside down. He said, I came that they might have life. And in as much as any other area of life, he meant to give life to relationships and to rebuild the concept of relationships and base them around love. Now, Jesus told this parable. It's a parable that we're familiar with, but we usually use the parable to relate to the poor and the needy, but it also relates to all relationships. So let's open up your Bear Notes, if you will, and we're going to look at Matthew chapter 25, and here's what it says. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat, and when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And when I was a stranger, you welcomed me, and when I was naked, you gave me clothes to wear, and when I was sick, you took care of me, and when I was in jail, you visited me. Then the ones who please the Lord will ask, well, when did we give you something to eat or drink? And when did we welcome you as a stranger and give you clothes to wear or visit you while you were sick or when in jail? And the king will answer, whenever you did it for any of these my people, no matter how unimportant they seemed, you did it for me. Now, what this means for relationships is that when we relate to people, when we relate to anybody, we're supposed to relate to them as if they're Jesus. We're supposed to relate to them as if the presence of Jesus is in this relationship. We're supposed to relate to them as if the way we relate to them affects the way that we relate to Jesus himself. Now, that can really change your relationships. He's saying this in the Roman Empire where relationships were really not that important and violated all the time. And now he's saying, treat every relationship as if you were relating to God himself. Wow, that is a big change in relationships. That means you treat every person as if they're Jesus, that you recognize the presence of Jesus in every interaction. And Jesus had already said lots of remarkable things about relationships. Remember, he said, you've heard it was said, do not commit murder, but I say to you, don't even have hate in your heart. Well, that's a good one for relationships. He said, you've heard it was said, do not commit adultery, but I say to you, don't even have a lust for another. That's a good one for relationships. So Jesus is just turning relationships upside down. Now, today we're going to look at 2 key ideas, and we're going to talk about both of those in point number 1, the 2 keys. Number 1, give the gifts of love and respect. Those are the 2. Love and respect. These are the 2 big keys. You see them throughout the Bible. And it is my hope that we can make these 2 right critical for us as we think about every relationship that we have. Love and respect. Every person has immense worth in the eyes of God. Therefore, they deserve our respect and they deserve our love. Notice how Peter says this in 1 Peter 2:17. He says, respect everyone and show special love for God's people. Every person deserves your respect because they're made in the image of God. And we've got to relate to each other out of a heart of love. Now, sometimes it's easier to show love and respect to people that aren't so close to us because we don't know them so well. And so, but it's saying, love and respect for people who are kind of on the outskirts of our lives, and love and respect for people who are the closest ones to us, about whom we know all their foibles and all their weaknesses. In Ephesians 4:15, Paul said it this way. He said, "Instead, speaking the truth in a spirit of love, we must grow up in every way to Christ, who is the head." Now, some people speak truth, but it's not loving or it's not respectful. And some people speak love, but they shy away from ever bringing up the hard truths. And sometimes truth hurts, but truth does not have to maim, kill, and destroy, okay? So we've got to think through, take time to say things in a caring way, in a respectful way. And just a tip here for the younger husbands in the room, if a woman ever says to you, "Does this make me look fat?" your only response is, "You always look beautiful." Okay, just kind of chalk that away in this memory storage place, okay? Now, Paul talked a lot about marriage in Ephesians chapter 5. And at the end of the chapter, he kind of sums up his whole concept. Now, notice what happens when Paul sums up his entire message about marriage and relationships in Ephesians 5. He says this, Ephesians 5:33. This is kind of his summary at the end. "So again I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." He goes right back to those same two concepts, love and respect. Now, I want to talk about these two ideas for a moment. This is from Emerson Eggerichs. He wrote the books Love and Respect, and also the book Cracking the Communication Code. So, the University of Washington studied 2,000 couples for 20 years. And over that time, they tried to figure out what are the most basic ingredients that build a strong and a lasting marriage and any kind of successful relationship. And what they came up with were two words, and the two words were love and respect. Now, the thing is, though, that sometimes men and women see this a little differently. Social researcher Shanti Feldhahn did this study of American men. Now, this is interesting that after the first service, one of our church members told me that their company are the ones who did this research right here in the DFW area. So here's the research. Okay, get ready. They ask American men, "Would you rather be left alone and unloved in the world, or would you rather be viewed as inadequate and disrespected?" Okay, there's your two choices. Those are two bad choices, right? Would you rather be alone and unloved in the world, or would you rather be perceived as inadequate and disrespected? And here are the startling results. Approximately 80% of men said they would choose to live life alone and unloved in the world if the only other choice were to be disrespected. Wow. That seems to me like a huge revelation. And think about it this way. Men in wartime, they go out as soldiering, and they're willing to die for the honor of their country on the battlefield. But how could that same guy come home and live in dishonor at home and in his own hometown? So a lot of men think this way. Not everybody, but approximately 80%. That if they had a choice, they would take being alone and unloved for the rest of their lives rather than living in a constant state of disrespect. What about women on the other hand? On the other hand, women said they would choose the other one. They would rather be disrespected and choose love. So Emerson Eggerichs then asked 7,000 people. He kind of wanted to take this from the negative side and see how this related in specific conversations. And so here's what he asked people. When you're in a conflict with your spouse, so this is a marriage situation, okay. When you're in a conflict with your spouse, do you feel unloved or do you feel disrespected? So that's what he was looking for. He was looking kind of for the negative side, like in a specific situation, in a situation of stress, argument, conflict, that sort of thing. How do you feel at the moment? Do you feel unloved or do you feel disrespected? So here's how that one came out. 72% of women said that in an argument, they feel unloved. And 83% of men said that in an argument, they feel disrespected. So they're both feeling different things here, even though it's the same argument. Now, the truth is, everybody needs both. Everybody needs love and respect. But statistically, this is a significant difference. It would be a statistically significant difference if it was 54 to 46. But this is like 80-20. And so that's huge. It's almost like the book, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I mean, this is like totally different worlds that people are living on. So it's important for us to understand how this research might affect our own lives. So now, in light of this research, let's look again at what Paul said about husband and wife relationships. It seems that he might have had access to some of this research. Or maybe 2,000 years ago, God gave him the exact words that he needed to say so that this would communicate throughout all history. Ephesians 5:33, so again I say to you, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Isn't that fascinating? That Paul tacks into the very things that's at the heart of conflict and argument and that sort of thing. And see, what happens is, and this is what Emerson Eggerichs talks about. He said, if you don't do this, if you don't go with this research and realize what's going on in the heart, remember, in a conflict, men feel disrespected. In a conflict, nearly all women feel unloved. And so it's not 100%, but it's a lot. If you neglect this, he said, what happens is it's easy to get on the crazy cycle. And none of us want to be on the crazy cycle, right? The crazy cycle is when one person is feeling disrespected and the other person is feeling unloved, and the one who's disrespected feels disrespected, that person is arguing based on disrespect, and the one who feels unloved is arguing based on being unloved, and they're talking about completely different things, and they don't realize it. They think they're talking about the same thing, and they just get in this crazy cycle that goes around and around because they can't ever solve this conflict. So God's word gives us some help here about love and respect. Remember what Jesus said. Whenever you did it for any of my people, no matter how important they seemed, you did it for me. So treat them like Jesus. All right, that's the first thing about love and respect. Let's look on to number 2. Let's flip over in our outline. Number 2, we'll get to some more practical matters here, is to avoid manipulation. Avoid manipulation. Because manipulation cuts against love and respect, both. If you're going to build long-lasting relationships, if you're going to build healthy relationships, you've got to figure out how to eliminate manipulation in that relationship. In Proverbs 13:17, it says, unreliable messengers cause trouble, but those who can be trusted bring peace. When you manipulate another person, it tears down the trust. And it's hard to have a solid relationship unless you have trust. So don't tear down that trust. To avoid manipulation, you have to take responsibility for your actions. Okay, we talk about this a lot, right? Take responsibility for your actions. Now, how do you know if you're not taking responsibility for your actions? Well, there's a clue. There's like a trick. And if you can remember this is what I try to do. I try to remember this because this trick will tell me whether or not I'm taking responsibility for my actions. And here's the trick. Am I trying to blame someone else? Because when I'm trying to blame, I realize I'm trying to shift the responsibility over to someone else. My parents caused me to do this, or society caused me to do this, or the devil made me do it, whatever. Blaming is shifting responsibility to someone else. So this is what I try to do. Whenever I think that, and whenever I just say something about blaming someone else, instantly I try to think, okay, I need to turn it back to me and accept responsibility for what's my part in this issue. So, in Matthew 5, Jesus said, you don't make your words true by embellishing them with religious lace. In making your speech sound more religious, it becomes less true. Just say yes and no. And when you manipulate words to try to get your own way, you go wrong. Manipulation. Why do we manipulate? It's just because we want to control things, right? We manipulate because we want power. Hitler took over Europe. Why? Because he wanted to have power over all Europe. And ever since then, everybody's been trying to take over their own environment, take over their own relationships, over their own people, their own office, their own house. And often use manipulation to get the power. Even in religion, sometimes people play the God card, like, God told me to tell you. So that is a manipulation by saying it's from God. Now, in Matthew 23, Jesus is talking about the religious leaders, and he's giving them a pretty hard time here. He says, "Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, then they're bound by that oath or that promise. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift on the altar, then they're bound by that oath. They're bound by that promise." This was like ancient trickery. Okay, this is just religious manipulation. It's almost like saying, I swear on a stack of Bibles if my fingers aren't crossed. Okay. So, people have been doing this forever. I mean, even as little kids, I remember doing this very thing. Okay, so, but that's a religious style of manipulation. Now, you know about the manipulation triangle, right? So the manipulation triangle in relationships is persecution, victim, rescue, okay? One person persecutes the other, then the other, hurts the other, then the other, or yells at the other, then the other becomes a victim and starts crying, and then the person comes back, want to rescue them, and then the person who rescues, then they want to persecute the original person for being mean to them in the first place. Then that person feels bad, and then the other person rescues them. And it's this triangle just around and around. Now, if you ever have watched Lucy and Ricky Ricardo, the entire show is based on this idea. Ricky says something mean to Lucy. Lucy then cries. Then Ricky comes back and says, "I'm sorry. Oh my, I didn't really mean that to hurt your feelings." And then she does something mean to him to get him back for it. And then he feels bad. And then she comes and rescues him just in time for him to be mean to Lucy again. Okay, so the entire show, it just goes around the triangle. Now, if you lived in an environment where this happened in your home all the time, then you're pretty comfortable around this triangle. And what I try to do in my own life is get off of the triangle. Just don't go to that place. Don't be the persecutor. Don't be the victim. Don't be the rescuer. Just stay off that triangle because it makes for poor relationships, and it is a total package of manipulation. All right, let's talk about some practical things that people do manipulation-wise. We're going to 4 things. One of them is exaggeration. Okay, one of them is exaggeration. Like, you never help me when I need it. Okay, that's just not true, is it? I mean, nobody has never helped anyone, really not one time in their entire life have they never helped. Or I told you 1,000,000 times. Really 1,000,000, has it been that many? So we do exaggeration for impact, but it's not true. So, as Jesus said, let's just go with yes or no, not make up the whole 1,000,000 thing. Okay, so the first one is exaggeration. It's just a manipulation tactic. A second tactic is negative labels. Negative labels. Like, "Yes, sir, your highness." Okay, that's a good one. Or, "Get it yourself, helpless." Okay. So it is a way to cast blame on the other person by attacking them using negative labels. And let me just say, social media, oh my gosh, it is just all negative labels, right? So that's a tough world to live in there. Okay, the next one is dredging up the past. Dredging up the past. Now, actually, we talked about this some last week about, Jesus' version on dredging up the past is don't let the sun go down in your anger, right? Okay. But I read this somewhere. It says, there's always someone with the ability to remember every little detail, categorize it, file it, retain it, and recall it at just the right moment. Okay. So dredging up the past. So Jesus' plan is don't let the sun go down in your anger. What we try to do at our house is the 48-hour rule. Let's settle things within 48 hours. Now, if you've never done this before, then you may have a lot of things to work through, but if you keep up to date on it, then you ought to be able to solve things in 48 hours. Now, if it's some terrible thing that happened, work through it. Get a therapist, whatever it takes. Work through a major serious problem. But then once you solve it, you got to let it go. You got to put it in the past. Because if you keep dredging up stuff, it just tears down relationships because it is a manipulation tactic that's deadly. One more is loaded questions. Loaded questions. Loaded questions are like, can't you do anything right? I remember hearing that one as a child a lot, okay? Or like this, why can't you act like a human being? Okay, I remember both of those pretty well. Loaded questions. Now, I read a communication expert who said this. I have to read it because it's complicated. When you speak to someone, it's a complicated transaction. Number one is what you meant to say. Number two is what you actually said. Number three is what the other person hears. Number four is what the other person thinks they hear. Number five is what the other person says about what you said. And number six is what you think about what the other person said you said. Okay, so any little interaction gets pretty complicated. And so that's why when you add manipulation in there, it gets more complicated. So that's why avoid manipulation. To build healthy relationships, we need to eliminate communication attacks. Okay. Back of the page for number 3. Let's look at this one. Number 3 is demonstrate faithfulness. Demonstrate faithfulness. It takes time to build solid relationships because you have to build trust. And trust is built over thousands of interactions and relationships. Therefore, demonstrate faithfulness. In 1 Corinthians 4:2, Paul said to the church at Corinth, now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. And every relationship is a trust that God gives you. Especially your number one relationship, your relationship to God. It is a sacred trust that God has presented to you. So you've got to treasure that and take care of that and handle it well and be faithful. And other than our relationship with God, there's no more sacred trust than the key relationships in your life, your family and your best friends. And those are sacred trusts that God has presented before you, and you've got to handle them well. You've got to be faithful in those relationships. In Luke 16:10, Jesus said, if you're faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in the large ones. But if you are dishonest in the little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibility. So trust is proven by what? It's proven by the details. It's proven by the details. You don't have to do giant things. It's in the little things that happen. Now, I've heard this said in a husband and wife situation that couples view the little things differently. So like, if my wife were to give me a trip with my golf buddies to go to Scotland, to Edinburgh, to play at the old course, the original course of golf, and have a golf outing, that would be, I would owe her like 1,000 points for the rest of my life because I would be so in debt. She would have outserved me so much. Okay. But they say, and I'm no expert in this, but this is just what I hear. They say for wives, it's a little different. If you take your wife to Venice and you take her on a gondola ride with flowers, that's 1 point, okay? And if you come home and bring flowers after work, that's 1 point. And if you listen carefully, that's 1 point. So that's good to know, guys, okay? That is really good. It's a different world, okay? It's good to know. But see, you can make that good because how is faithfulness determined? It's determined in the little things. So you can build up 1 point, 1 point, 1 point. You don't have to think, I got to do something great to really show faithfulness and show love. No, it's just the little things that build respect, that build love, that are faithful acts of caring. Now, I'd like to share this idea about bids in relationship. Like when you're playing a card game, you bid, right? Okay, so in a card game, in some card games, you bid to show whether or not you're going to play this hand, you know? So each person goes around and they bid, and when it gets to you, you decide if you're going to bid, if you're going to be in the game, if you're going to be in the relationship, right? And you can bid and stay in the game, or you can say, you know, I got a bad hand, I'm out. And then you're out of that and let them play. Okay. So what about bids in relationships? Like when someone reaches out to you, it's kind of like a bid. When someone wants to connect with you, when someone says hi to you, it's kind of like a bid saying, you know, let's connect, let's talk, let's have a little relationship here. So you've got to the question then, how do you respond to a bid when it comes your way? You can respond in a positive way, or you can respond in a negative way. You can, in essence, say, put your cards on the table and say, I'm out. I don't want to talk. Whenever someone comes with a request for an emotional connection. So a bid can be simple. Knock, knock, who's there, you know? A bid can be small. You look nice today, or just hello. A bid can be huge, like, will you marry me? Okay, that's a big one. That's maybe the biggest one there is, okay. A bid could be like, you're not going to believe what happened yesterday, okay? And so leaning forward, saying, I invite you into this special thing that happened. So yesterday, Peggy was at the grocery store and ran into a woman wearing an Ole Miss football jersey. And so she went up and said, hey, you're an Ole Miss person, you know, our whole family, we've been Ole Miss people from childhood. And see, even something you wear can become a bid that's reaching out if anybody else relates, you know, to what I'm wearing today. So that's just another interesting part of this. Now, at the University of Washington, John Gottman, you recall, he's the guy that at the Love Lab at the University of Washington, okay, he's the guy who brings in couples for evaluation, and their lab can tell the couple with a high degree of accuracy in 15 minutes if they're going to still be married 10 years from now. Wow, that's pretty significant, isn't it? That would be a scary place to go. Okay, well, anyway, so this is the guy I'm talking about, John Gottman at the Love Lab. They've discovered that husbands heading for divorce disregard their wives' bid 82% of the time. When the wife says something that's saying, you know, let's interact, let's connect, husbands heading for divorce 82% of the time. They wire people up and watch them on video, and they'll do it for like a week sometime and count. They count every bid. Every time the wife says something, you know, that's reaching out, they'll count whether or not the husband responded to that. They've got it, it's like statistical evidence. And they've discovered that the ones that are heading for divorce are ones that disregard their wife's bid for connection 82% of the time, while husbands in stable relationships disregard their wives' bids only 19% of the time. So, I mean, nobody's perfect, but still, that's a huge difference. Wives, on the other hand, not quite as bad, but wives headed for divorce act preoccupied with other activities when their husbands place a bid for attention 50% of the time, while happily married wives disregard their husbands' bids only 14% of the time. Now, when two people consistently respond to their spouse's bid, it's like money in the bank in their relationship. It builds equity. It builds love equity. So that when the time comes that they go through hard times, they've got some stuff built up. They got some love and respect built up that allows them to make it through the tough times. And that's part of the thing that they noticed about how they're able to know that couples are not going to last 10 years of marriage. Because like if they're not building any love and respect equity, soon as they have some major problem, which is going to happen in a 10-year period of time, right? It's going to happen to everybody. As soon as they have some big problem, their marriage is going to fold up because they got nothing. They got nothing to stand on. But if husbands and wives are positively responding to their spouse's bid, they're building up love and respect equity in their love bank, and it allows them to make it through the good times and to make it through the tough times. So, now, when my wife walks through the den where I'm reading, and when I'm reading, I can be very focused and completely block out everything in the whole house, okay? So she walks through the room while I'm reading and says, I'm going to go outside and plant some flowers in the garden. And I don't respond at all because I didn't even hear it. Well, actually, I did hear it. Like if somebody said, hello, I'm talking to you. I said, oh, yeah, I heard that, right? But otherwise, I completely ignored it. And so here's what Peggy does now, knowing this bid system. She says, hello, I just sent out a bid. Okay. All right. And I'm like, huh? What? Did somebody say something? You know. And so then I say, oh, wow, you're going to go plant flowers in the garden? That's great. It's going to make our yard look beautiful. You're such a cool person. Okay, so now, for many years now, Peggy and I have been trying to base our relationship on love and respect. And we're trying to remember this. We're trying to remember whenever you did it for any of my people, no matter how important they seemed, you did it for me. And so we're trying in our relationship to see in each other person the very face of Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Our Father, relationships can be sort of tough sometimes. And yet all of us have this opportunity to be faithful in our love and respect toward all people. And we know, Lord, that when we do that, it also builds up this kind of love equity between us that can take us through the good times as well as the hard times. I pray, Lord, that all of us would recognize that Jesus, when you came into this world, you wanted to turn the whole concept of relationships upside down. No longer a world of just manipulation and power grubbing and all that kind of stuff. But now we can truly love one another and respect one another. I pray, Lord, for every one of us in this room that we would live our lives in love and respect and seeing the face of Jesus.